Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace in the Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the P-40C, an American fighter aircraft designed by Curtiss, coming at a tier of 2 and a batter rating of 2.3. Today's historical overview will chart the development of the P-40 fighter from its conception all the way up to and including the P-40C variant. As a result, we begin thus. The P-40 was originally conceived as the evolution of Curtiss's previous Hawk 75 fighter, better known as the P-40C in service. Initial development began in 1937 with the Hawk 81 model. The aim with this was to ensure that the aircraft would remain competitive with European types such as the Supermarine Spitfire and the Messerschmitt Bf 109. To achieve this, it was decided that the existing 1050 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1830 radial engine would be replaced with the Allison V1710-11 1150 horsepower inline engine. The first prototype was designated XP-37. In testing, the plane became the first American fighter to exceed 300 miles per hour or 483 kilometers an hour in level flight. However, the engine was to prove unreliable, particularly in terms of the supercharger's output. Therefore, with the potential of the Allison engine realised, work started on the second prototype design, known as the XP-40 in 1938. This would see the Pratt & Whitney radial engine, as fitted to the 10th production P-40CA, replaced with the 1160 horsepower Allison V1710-19 engine. Flying for the first time on the 14th of October 1938, the XP-40 proved to be fast at low altitude. As the XP-40 was being produced in response to a contract issued by the United States Air Force on the 30th of July 1938, hence the justification for the design work in the first place, it entered a competition in January of 1939 against other pursuit fighter prototypes. The XP-40 won the competition, leading to the United States Army Air Force putting down an order for 524 P-40 aircraft on the 27th of April 1939. The net result was that the first P-40 started rolling off the production line in May of 1940. The first 200 planes were powered by the Allison V1710-33 1090 horsepower engine and armed with two 12.7mm Browning machine guns in the nose, backed up by two 7.62mm Browning machine guns in the wings. It should be noted that the P-40A variant came out of this, whereby a single P-40 was adapted to the reconnaissance role, seeing a camera installed in the rear of the fuselage, meaning that in total there were 199 P-40s and one P-40A. The production order was paused at this point, so that 142 P-40s could be produced for the French, yet these planes were not delivered in time before the conclusion of the Battle of France on the 25th of June 1940, leading to them being lended to the British Royal Air Force as Tomahawk Mark Is. The production order resumed in January of 1941, with the plane's designation now changed to P-40B to denote a new variant which was equipped with self-sealing fuel tanks, armour for the pilot and a bulletproof windscreen. On top of this, the plane's armament was also boosted with two additional 7.62mm machine guns mounted in the wings, taking the tally up to 4. These improvements, however, compromised the plane's performance somewhat due to the additional mass added to the plane. A total of 131 P-40Bs were made. The P-40C would follow on in March of 1941 and would be the final iteration of the Hawk 81 model, known as the H-81A3. The P-40C, which you're seeing on screen today, saw the introduction of the ability for the plane to carry either an external drop tank or up to 500 pounds of external bomb ordnance, that being 227 kilograms in modern day terms. Both the P-40B and P-40C would see service in the hands of the British Royal Air Force, known as the Tomahawk Mark IIA and Tomahawk Mark IIB respectively, but more importantly, the P-40C would equip the Flying Tigers, also known as the first American volunteer group, the AVG, which served with the Chinese Air Force in the China-Burma theatre throughout 1942. The first AVG excelled with the P-40C under the leadership of one Claire Chennault, who taught his pilots how to use the plane's superiority over its Japanese opponents, i.e. the Ki-27, the Ki-43 and the A6M0, at higher speeds to exploit boom and zoom tactics. According to official figures, in the space of 6.5 months, the Flying Tigers would account for 297 victories, only suffering 4 losses in return. The P-40C would be succeeded by the P-40D as of April 1941. And with our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the P-40C handles in the skies of War Thunder Arcade. Today's gameplay is brought to you from the ground strike map Top of the World. For this will be used in the following setup. Stealth belts for both types of armament, the reason being in our experience the stealth belts are proven to be the most effective at dealing damage to foes. Whether it be the armour piercing rounds of both belts, puncturing holes in the opponent's fuselage, or the incendiary rounds following through and igniting exposed fuel tanks. Our gun convergence is set to 400 metres for two reasons. Firstly, the noting of the fact that only your 7.62mm machine guns mounted in the wings are affected by your convergence setting, and therefore we have to accommodate the low muzzle velocity of the 7.62mm machine gun round, whereby at a range in excess of 650 metres you'll have to compensate for vertical drop by a considerable margin, and that means that the convergence of these machine guns ideally should be set to something at medium to short distance in my opinion, i.e. 500 metres or less. The second reason, which puts us to the 400 metre gun convergence mark, is the versatility of the P-40C, as we're going to see throughout the course of this match, whereby you can engage in turn fighting, boom and zoom and interception roles throughout the course of the match, and the 400 metre gun convergence will work well in all three regards. Finally, our fuel load is set to the standard 30 minutes to ensure we can make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity. With that, we automatically move into the climb rate of the P-40C, and what we've hopefully seen from the start of this match is that in short sprints at a medium altitude, i.e. 2,000 to 4,000 metres altitude, the climb rate of the P-40C is rather good, whereby when you start to run out of overall speed you can use your strong war emergency power to reconsolidate your speed using a 25-degree climb angle before having to level out eventually, ideally when you hit 4,000 metres altitude as you start to hit your maximum point of your ideal altitude range, the bottom half being 2,000 metres, below which you lose a considerable amount of climb rate performance and your engine starts to really feel a drag on it compared to above 2,000 metres. In position we go head to head with a P-40D at this point, noting that we cannot go into a committed head-on because they'll rip us apart with their 12.7mm machine guns, but we can snap right out of the way and come up underneath them via a split S to pick them off for our first kill. At which point we start to build up a little bit more altitude, getting just slightly above our ideal altitude limit of 4,000 metres, because what we should note is only when we go above 4,500 metres altitude will we start to experience a drop off in our engine's performance, and above 4,750 metres altitude will we experience a drop off in our control surfaces performance, whereby they start to lose the overall lightness on them and become quite heavy, particularly the elevator. And it's with this that we move into a key weakness of the P-40C. In retrospect, one could consider this to be a powerful plane when it's the top batter rating plane or when it's just in a 2.7 match, but when you start to see opponents that are batter rating of 3.0 and 3.3, a key weakness starts to become pronounced, and that is the slow nature of this plane compared to its competitors. The Special Smith 19 F1 in particular, at a batter rating from what I recall of 3.0, is able to outrun us at higher altitudes and has a greater top speed on the whole. Now we can abuse our straight line acceleration, whether it be from stall to 375 km/h rather rapidly on engine power alone, or with war emergency power up to 475 km/h. We can abuse that to keep in touch with the Messerschmitt 19. We can use our decent dive speed acceleration, which matches theirs, to keep up with them in the dive, our max dive speed for reference being 876 km/h. But we do not have the ability to catch this opponent, and that only becomes more pronounced on types such as the MiG-334 in a dive, or alternatively the P-47D in a straight line up at high altitude, and the P-38E and the P-38G, which you'll see every so often. This means that we are at the whim of our opponent deciding to come around for a head-to-head with us, or alternatively making the mistake of going for somewhere else rather than looking at us as the clear target, i.e. the threat to them. And that's what we did there with the Messerschmitt 19 F1. They took out our friendly Yak 1, but in return we took them out instead. And this issue is extended when you go into the Interceptor role, whereby as you're about to see now, we need to take out a Heinkel 111H6 in order to make sure our bases are wiped out over the course of the game. But to do so with nobody else in the role of Interceptor for this match apart from our P-47 who's engrossed and taken out an enemy Beaufort, which is understandable, we need to now take out this threat, and to do so we're going to start pushing above our ideal altitude limit and above our maximum altitude before we start to experience the drop off in engine performance and the drop off in control surface responsiveness. In return, this means that you can spend a lot of time chasing down enemy bombers, and we're only going to do it to this one for the time being due to the time that it's going to exhaust. Fortunately for us, on the plus side, we have a good armament configuration that gives us the range to bring down those bombers who would like to stay out of engagement distances with us, whereby the nose-mounted nature of our 12.7mm machine guns means is that you have an effective maximum range of around 1.2 to 1.3 kilometers on those machine guns alone, as they're not convergence reliant. In return, once we've adjusted our lead here using the lead indicator, we can see that we only need to get a good number of hits from our 12.7mm machine guns in particular to set the left-hand wing of that Heinkel 111 on fire and cause them to burn to death. If we'd not set them on fire, they would have been able to get away from us as we reconsolidate our speed for a good period of time, but it's worked out here as they fall apart for another kill. And this is where the arm distribution of this plane comes in handy, because whenever a foe feels as though they're able to get away from the reach of your firepower, you can retort by saying, well, I've got the nose-mounted heavy caliber machine guns, which gives me the ability to keep you in range just that little bit longer. And therefore those foes who may be trying to exploit hammerheads over the top of you at higher altitudes, such as for example if a P-40C gets above you and they're trying to stall above you at say 5,000 meters altitude, you can use your nose-mounted machine guns to punish them for it. But now we turn to the F4U Corsair coming up towards us, and here this goes to highlight the poor durability of the P-40C, whereby we do not have the ability to soak up damage to the nose of this plane in particular. The F4U strikes us for a limited number of 12.7mm machine gun rounds on the nose cover. And in return, this means that we now have an orange nose cover on this plane as they begin to stall out underneath us, and in fact they convert from a stall, or going into a stall, they decide to come out of that and go down towards the deck, but fortunately for us we're able to set them on fire with the nose-mounted machine guns once again, and that takes them out of the game. What we see is that if we start to take multiple hits to the nose of this plane, at first the engine cover or the overall nose portion of the plane will get damaged, and then the engine starts to take considerable damage, and you only need 1 or 2 hits from say a 7.62mm machine gun, or even calibers around that, in order to actually lose a considerable amount of performance on the engine. When it goes yellow, for example, you will lose approximately 25% of your engine's performance, and you can only imagine what's going to happen when it goes to orange or red, and it will necessitate that you need to return to the airfield as soon as possible, or you end up becoming cannon fodder for the opposition as you get drawn into furballs down low due to your lack of engine performance. The airframe issues continue at this point, whereby you have a fuel tank which is mounted behind the pilot, and if this is struck multiple times, it is likely to ignite. Now this fuel tank alone has a high chance of burning your plane to death, but more importantly, with there being fuel tanks mounted underneath where your pilot sits, if the rearmost fuel tank is ignited, it has a high chance of the fire extending to the fuel tanks mounted in the ventral position, and the whole plane will go up in smoke very rapidly. On the plus side, however, the airframe, the outer layer of the airframe, is able to take glancing blows from machine guns quite easily, which means that you're able to soak up a good amount of damage and not lose your control surfaces or the responsiveness of your control surfaces under a small amount of fire. You are durable against those instances where foes are allowed to target key portions of your plane. Life is going to become hard. And one other thing to note is your cockpit seems to be very exposed to cannon fire. Even with a high vitality build, in terms of my crew skills in this plane, I've had a number of pilot knockouts in head-ons where I've tried to hide myself underneath my opponent's line of fire, but I've taken one glancing blow of a 20mm cannon from the likes of Messerschmitt 110C4, and that's been enough to take my pilot out. Whereas in other planes, perhaps it hasn't been as glaring an issue. I've been able to take a scratch round near my pilot. In the case of this plane, the pilot seems to get knocked out quite easily by comparison. Now in lofting over the top of our foes so they come out of spawn, we're just looking for those who are deciding to climb up at this point. We're not going to harass through the spawn, because we do not have the boom and zoom capability to do so, i.e. over the longer distance and at very high speed. And with that we should come on to our control surfaces. In general you have a nice balance of controllability here, your roll rate for example being decent, and interestingly it follows the same trait as with the P-40E1, whereby once you get to a given speed range it actually increases for a limited period of time. The speed range here being 340 to 540 km an hour, where you'll see your roll rate improve by 25%. Once you go to higher speeds however, i.e. 650 km an hour to 800 km an hour, you will experience a roll rate lockup of 75% lockup, which means that your ability to roll the plane in high speed boom and zoom dives is severely compromised, and you really need to line up your foes in a straight line and know exactly where you're going well before you execute your boom and zoom pass. Moving on to the elevator at this point, your elevator is average in my opinion, and the reason for this is that whilst you can loop rather tightly with this plane, and it's reminiscent of the P-36 planes that precede this aircraft historically and that are in game, the issue is that your elevator is quite heavy to the initial response, which means that executing the loop or executing the 90-degree roll turn takes a little bit of time, which holds this plane back a little bit, compared to the more lightly controlled opposition you can go up against, such as the Supermarine Spitfire Mark I. And finally coming on to the rudder, although we should actually talk about the elevator's lockup being between 700 and 800 km an hour, whereby you will lose 20% of your overall capability, which isn't too harsh. Your rudder is very strong, and I would go to say it's the most powerful control surface on this plane, which is an interesting contrast compared to the P-40C. With no desynchronization or indeed instability caused by the rudder, you'll find that you're able to execute hammerheads very nicely, as we saw that against the enemy Blenheim. And the only issue with the rudder is that once you go from 500 to 650 km an hour, you will lose 90% of your rudder's controllability. And I'll say that again, 90%. That means at high speed in the boom and zoom pass, this plane becomes a straight line bullet. You're not able to precisely change the direction of your line of fire. You have to carry on in a straight line or make considerable adjustments using your roll rate and your elevator in order to change your approach in the boom and zoom pass, which costs energy and costs you the ability to get a clean shot on your opposition, as we'll see right at the end of this match. Now outside of that, with the balanced nature of the control surfaces, what about your turn circle? Well, your turn circle on this plane is only slightly better than the P-40C in my experience, which in turn means that you've actually got quite a good turn circle, only falling behind the likes of the Supermarine Spitfire Mark I and the A6M2N. By comparison, that means that you've got the ability to take on most foes in the turn fight so long as you pick the opposition accordingly, but most foes you can at least have an equal footing against when you put all your other control surfaces into the mix. Going for a reload there, our ammo capacity, we should also note, is rather high, which means we're never going to have to worry about running out of bullets, and the timing of the exhaustion of our 12.7mm machine gun rounds compared to our 7.62mm machine gun rounds is such that we're never going to not have a machine gun available unless we force a reload. As we go ahead to the SM-79 here, and the other things to note about this plane is that with the stall speed of 140 km an hour and the great straight line acceleration on this plane, as talked about earlier, you're never going to be in a position where you're actually forced into a stall unless you decide to go for the stall, and we're going to see that here against the F6F-5, whereby we're above 5,000 metres altitude, we are playing against the engine performance of this plane compared to the Hellcat, and cutting over the top, and we're cutting this very tight here. We're avoiding the incoming fire the Hellcat has done on their version of their stall, taking a limited number of hits to the left hand wing, and it's enough to take them out the sky for our 8th kill. Cutting it very fine there, but we can see even outside of our altitude envelope, we can still perform well. So as we go into our final boom and zoom pass, and we're going to take out the Heinkel 51, we were hoping to get multiple kills, but we'll never get a clean shot for the reasons explained earlier in terms of high speed lockup. The other thing to note about the ideal speed range of this plane is that it lies between 300 and 500 km an hour, whereby if you go to high speed you experience the lockup on the rudder, which is the most painful, as you're now seeing, and going below those speeds you lose a little bit of an edge in your control surfaces in terms of their responsiveness. But as we miss the MS-410 here as we try to line them up due to the lockup of this plane, the game comes to its end, and it's time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. With our 9 kills, we're able to pick up 35,448 silver lions and 4,786 research points. To defeat the P-40C in a given matchup then, I can recommend one or two approaches. Approach number 1 is if you're in a plane with superior manoeuvrability in turn circle or equal manoeuvrability in turn circle. These planes include, but not limited to, the C-202, the P-40C, the Supermarine Spitfire Mark I and the Ki-43. Whereby all these aircraft will be able to give the P-40C a run for its money in their turn fight, and if you can lower this plane below 2,000 metres altitude, those planes which work well at low altitudes but have slightly wider turn circles, such as the Yak-1 and the MS-410, will be able to attack the P-40C in the turn fight on an equal footing, as once this plane gets to lower altitude, it loses a good chunk of engine performance, and on top of that, once it goes below 300 km an hour, its control surfaces start to feel a little bit heavier than usual, at which point your plane with lesser manoeuvrability will start to move into an equal position of manoeuvrability in turn circle. Option 2 is if you're flying a plane with superior climb rate and superior straight line acceleration stroke top speed, the likes of which include the VG-33, the Messerschmitt 109F1 and the P-47D Thunderbolt. These are typically planes which will be at a higher batter rating, but of course there are the exceptions such as the Heinkel 100D1 at a batter rating of 1.7. In all these instances you need to use your superior performance in the climb to get above the P-40C, and if you can bait them to pursue you up to say 5,000 metres altitude, you can force them to stall out as they lose engine performance and control surface responsiveness, and therefore sit in your wake as you're able to come around via a hammerhead and take them out with a singular boom and zoom pass typically. But by avoiding such circumstances today, and I would strongly advise being dubious about using head-ons to defeat this plane simply because of the nose-mounted nature of the 12.7mm machine guns, we were able to demonstrate that the P-40C is a versatile fighter, much like the P-40E1, whereby despite its slight drop in overall speed and climb rate, this plane has the greater versatility conferred to it due to the fact that the nose-mounted 12.7mm machine guns give it the greater effective range, and this plane is a much more stable package on its control surfaces, meaning that if anything, it makes a much more complete package compared to the P-40E1 in my experience, albeit with the lack of ability to rip foes out of the sky with 6 12.7mm machine gun rounds, and that ability to perform up to 5,000 metres altitude on the Allison engine, where in the P-40C's case, you can only really take it up to 4,000 metres altitude before you start pushing the limit. Regardless, the P-40C is a worthy aircraft, and if you were able to get it as part of the New Year's celebration for 2018, completing the task, it's one plane that I think most of you will enjoy. And if anything, it truly captures the spirit of Claire Chennault, and when you're flying this plane, you really do feel like the flying tiger. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care, and good luck in the skies.